for the first of what's going to be 3 debates of our local House candidates. Tonight's is hosted by the Stowe Reporter, and I just gotta say it's really cool to see everybody here. I haven't seen this many people in one room since I think Bruce Godden's retirement party. So it's good to be back. Like I said, this is the first of 3 debates over the next 2 nights, all of which are going to be are currently being live streamed on Green Mountain Access Television. Thank you to them very much. People watching at home, welcome as well. If you're so inclined and you want to watch it again, you can on the Green Mountain Access YouTube channel. Tonight's debate is between Democrat Scott Weathers and Independent Jed Lipsky. Both of them are trying to succeed Stowe's Heidi Sherman, who's represented Stowe in the legislature for the past 16 years. And before we get started, I'd just like to thank Heidi for all of her years of service in the legislature. Thank you. If you're watching, Heidi, it's been a pleasure working with you. You've been very supportive of the Stowe Reporter and very accessible at all hours, and we wish you well. So some ground rules. The debate will proceed as follows. First, the candidates will present their opening statements, and then we'll have a number of questions from me, the moderator, Tommy, interspersed by a few rounds in which the candidates will get to ask each other some questions. Candidates will have up to 2 minutes to answer each question. Greg Popa, our publisher / timekeeper, is sitting in the front row. He'll let people know if they're going over. You don't have to use all 2 minutes, but he'll let you know when you're getting close. We have a number of questions that, like I said, I'm going to ask, and they're going to ask each other. Toward the evening, I'd like to keep an eye on the clock, and I'd like to reserve time at the end for near the end for audience members to ask any questions if they'd like to as well. Please note, this is a forum for the candidates. This is not, and any questions from the audience ought to be questions, not speeches, please. Thanks. Follow-ups and or rebuttals are going to be up to the discretion of me. And at the end, the candidates will have brief closing statements, and they'll be on their way. So we did a coin flip, and Scott Weathers has opted to go first. Scott, you have 3 minutes for your opening statement.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tommy. I'm really glad to be here to talk about the future of Stowe. Jed, it's great to be here with you. I'm Scott Weathers, and I want to share a little bit about my experience and why I'm running to be your state representative. My partner, Michaela, and I moved to Stowe to start our family. Michaela grew up spending much of her childhood in Stowe, and I was happy to follow her to such an incredible place. Since we've lived here, we've experienced many of the challenges that our community is experiencing. For example, in the middle of the pandemic, I had to choose between earning an income and taking care of my ailing father. Then, Michaela and I struggled to find affordable housing in the community that we love. We now live on Mountain Road, right by the Matterhorn, where we wake up to traffic just about every day in the winter. Throughout these experiences, I've rolled up my sleeves to help our town and learned a lot that I didn't know. Working at the Department of Health, I helped lead the rollout of COVID vaccines across our state. I've also volunteered extensively in Stowe, serving on the Stowe Energy Committee and as a member of Stowe Rotary. I've also chaired the Lamoille County Democratic Committee and served as a member of the Lamoille County Meals on Wheels Board, as well as the board of the Vermont Sierra Club and the Morrisville Food Co-op. As your state representative, I'll bring not just a personal understanding of the issues that Stowe faces, but an ability to move the needle on complex policy issues. During the Obama administration, I worked to pass federal legislation on public health issues to keep our children healthy and happy. As the Trump years brought many of our policy fights to the state level, I worked with state legislatures across the country to improve the sustainability of our food system. Since I've declared my candidacy for this seat, I've knocked on just about every door in town. And as a result, this campaign has tremendous momentum. I'm proud to have earned the support of our U.S. Senator, Patrick Leahy, our Congressman, Peter Welch, and our incoming Congresswoman, Becca Ballant. I've also earned the endorsement of every single pro-choice, environmental, labor, and gun safety organization in this state. But most of all, I'm proud to have over 100 local Stowites endorsing me. I'm running as a Democrat to represent our town in the Vermont legislature. While the challenges that our community is experiencing are significant, we can and we will make progress. I understand from personal experience how our town can become more livable for local residents. I might not have all the answers, but I promise to listen and work hard to prioritize the issues that you care about. I look forward to earning your vote and celebrating with you on November 8th. Thank you.
Statement, please.
Before I start, I just want to say I've not been drinking whiskey all day. I have a cold. I tested negative, so if my voice sounds hoarse, it's because of the cold, and I'm trying to be respectful by telling you that. Thank you to the Stowe Reporter for hosting this debate. Thank you for all for being here, and thank you, Scott, for being part of the civic process. My name is Jed Lipsky. I've been coming to Stowe since I was 4 years old and feel very fortunate to have moved my family here 22 years ago. I'm running as an independent so I can truly focus on Stowe and not be distracted by the divisive politics of our times. It is time for civility and common sense. I'm socially liberal and financially responsible. To me, that means we have to figure out how to pay for these programs without hurting our residents and businesses, particularly those that are the most vulnerable. I'm aware that my image is not that of the quintessential politician. I'm a lifelong logger and a steward of the land. Logging is considered the most dangerous profession in North America. Harvesting timber on steep terrain in an environmentally responsible way requires constant problem solving and making hundreds of life and death decisions every single day. It is incredibly challenging and incredibly satisfying. Being a certified master logger is not something where I can just start calling myself an expert because I've been doing this for a few years. I had to go through rigorous third-party testing and evaluation by the Trust to Conserve Northeastern Forests. Worldwide, this is considered the highest standard. My service in the 3 rural communities which I have lived include 10 years on select board, 15 years on planning boards, 10 years on school boards, and numerous other positions. I've been an environmental advocate my whole life and anchored Vermont's first ecologically based town plan. I was driven to serve on school boards because I believe quality education is critical to the future of our society. The challenges of logging and all the positions have given me many opportunities for leadership. The people who know me, know my work and service, feel I am the most authentic candidate, and I am humbled by this support and sentiment. For those of you here who don't know me, I'm warning you in advance that brevity is not one of my strengths. I have too many years' experience with these issues and I care too much, but I'll do my best to be concise. More importantly, I have the reputation of being a smart, compassionate, good listener. I feel my experiences in these characteristics make me the best person to represent Stowe and its people. And before I say thank you, I want to sincerely, Scott, share my condolences with you and lost your father. That story is compelling and sad, and a million other Americans during that same epoch experienced the same thing, but sincere condolences. So folks, thank you very much. We can begin this civic process.
Okay. Enough of me. Now onto the questions. We started with Scott with the opening statements, so we'll start with Jed, and then each question that I ask will be alternating. Pretty easy with two of you to keep track. Let's do a little warm-up exercise. Easy one for you. What is the single most important piece of legislation you'd like to tackle if you're elected? Start with you, Jed. 2 minutes for each question, folks. 2 minutes.
Well, I've got a whole lot of notes, but this one means a lot to me. The most important issue to me facing our community is a three-legged milking stool. One leg is housing, the lack of affordable or workforce housing and this affects our economy. We have businesses all over the community. Just went by some on the way here, closed on one of the biggest tourist days of the year. Housing is a problem because that affects our economic sustainability. The whole economy of Stowe, which for almost 2/3 of a century has been a tourist-driven economy. Earlier it was agriculture, farming, forestry, and dozens of sawmills right here in this community. But the real driver now is the tourist industry, and it is at risk. So there's the availability of housing that impacts the sustainability of our economy, and it's also early child care. It's not ironic that I served on 2 different school boards and I value education. I'm not saying I'm envious, but Scott has a lot of nice degrees, and education wasn't the easiest experience I had. But this I know, our businesses need employees, and employees need to be able to get to work.
30 seconds.
If you have, many of them have children that need to go into early child care, which can cost as much as $20,000 per child annually. If they're going to be part of the workforce, they need to be able to have good, adequate, and affordable child care.
Thank you, Jed. Scott Weathers, what is the single most important piece of legislation you'd like to tackle if elected?
Thanks so much, Tommy. I've really enjoyed throughout this campaign door knocking. I've probably door knocked on just about every door in this town and met folks, and they've welcomed me into their home to talk about the issues that matter to you. One of the specific pieces of legislation that I'll mention here, I just want to start by telling a quick story. So about 2 years ago, in the middle of the pandemic, I was working for a nonprofit, and they asked me to return to the office in person. Now, at the time, our country did not have COVID vaccines or any other really sensible protections against the virus. And at the time, I was caregiving for my dad, who had been diagnosed with Parkinson's. And that put me in an awful position that no Vermonter should ever be in. I had to choose between an income and taking care of my ailing dad. And if our state had paid family leave, no Vermonter would have to make that decision. And that's why I want to be your state representative and be the single vote that our state needs to pass paid family leave. One other bill that I'll just mention briefly, critical climate legislation, the Clean Heat Standard. This is a bill that just needs one more vote to get across the finish line. And as a Democrat, I'm proud to support both of these bills. I know that my opponent is a good man. I know that he wants to help this community, just like all of us do. But I'd sincerely love to see him support both of these pieces of legislation. Thank you.
Tommy, did we get any response to?
Would you like to respond? Because he did, yes, address you. So you can get 30 seconds, Jed.
First of all, even though you have stated publicly that you are the only candidate in this race for this position that supported paid family leave, I have to say that's untrue. I'm not calling you a liar, I'm just saying it's just categorically untrue. would you let me finish my 30 seconds, please? Ad-free, please. I absolutely think it's imperative that we have some ability to provide all families with paid family leave. The big question is, how do we pay for it, and who pays for it, and what it costs? And the notion that it lost by one vote was, I don't consider accurate.
You can finish it up, 15 seconds.
So my opponent was quoted in the press this morning. He was asked about a policy detail related to paid family leave, and he said that he had no idea. I'd love to hear my opponent support paid family leave, and I didn't hear it in that answer.
All right, just 5 seconds. I said I would support paid family leave. I need to see the legislation, and I need the real important answers. Who's paying for it, and what's it going to cost?
Question 2. This one's for Scott to start off with. Scott, according to the state auditor's office, the state of Vermont, its institutions, and individual Vermonters received nearly $11 billion in federal funds during the first 2 years of the pandemic, of which $2.25 billion with a B, was distributed through the state legislature to various programs. Without that level of federal funding going forward, how will you prioritize spending on social services without burdening taxpayers or shifting costs to local governments?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tommy. And I think it's critical that we're able to provide consistent funding sources to support some of the programs that we've talked about already. As I mentioned, I support paid family leave, which will provide workers with paid time off if they need to take care of a family member or if they themselves fall sick. And I support the clean heat standard, which will help our state transition to cleaner sources of energy and to help low-income Vermonters save money on their fuel costs. Now, each of these bills have defined revenue plans for them. In the case of paid family leave, that would be funded through a small payroll tax increase, and I support this, especially if it is not on the backs of small businesses. The clean heat standard similarly has a defined revenue plan, and I think that those plans have been pretty clearly spelled out. Thanks.
Jed, will you repeat the question? Thank you. So according to the state office, the state of Vermont, its institutions, and individual Vermonters received nearly $11 billion in federal funds during the pandemic, of which $2.25 billion was distributed through the state legislature to various programs. Without that level of federal funding going forward, how will you prioritize spending on social services without burdening taxpayers or shifting costs to local governments?
Well, you bring up one of the most critical facts of our current moment in our history. We have been flush with federal money that has done an incredible amount of good work. There are many businesses and families that benefited from the COVID program. We have a problem. We're about to go over the edge in coming up with these funds. And the critical point that I feel I will be making and repeating making, I'm about as moderate as anyone in this room, and in other areas I'm beyond moderate. I consider myself very socially liberal. But when it comes to incurring massive debt and burden on all the homeowners in our community, landowners, property owners, families, whether they're lower middle class, or beyond, we need to have really clear answers on how we're going to pay for these programs. Whether it's paid family leave, the clean energy is a whole subject that is unraveling as we speak. Many of us have older farmhouses like mine, has oil heat. I have a lot of other problems with that house, but how we have to be forced to prioritize converting to a new cleaner system. 30 seconds? Yes. Which we all would like cleaner heat. I would for sure, and I hope to work to that means. But how are we going to pay for the retrofits for our houses, accessing money? There's no language, thoughts, or discussion on who pays for this and who carries the burden.
Okay, so it looks like Scott started that question off. We'll start with Jed this time, and this one is from our reader. Our reader submitted question, and thank you. We received a lot of them, so we won't get to all of them, and but we appreciate it. This question is: many businesses in Stowe are struggling to find workers. In your opinion, what issues are driving this worker shortage in our community, and what can be done to address them? Jed.
Tom, it's a good question. As I've walked the town and talked to dozens of business owners, that's why it's one of the big priorities. This is a crisis. It's a crisis of sustainability, and it's a crisis for families and businesses alike. What has driven this? It's a complex thing. COVID had a large impact, which brought a lot of people exfiltrating from urban areas and moving to rural areas because it was deemed friendlier and safer. This had an impact. Vail Resorts, on one hand, affected our economy by slashing the costs of season passes. So folks from all over from Connecticut or New Jersey that skied elsewhere, in New Hampshire, Boston, bought passes. So that really exacerbated sort of the traffic problem, which is another particularly challenging problem. But the housing piece itself, with the pandemic, there were investment groups that scarfed up 100% of the more affordable, lower cost houses without mortgage contingencies, without inspections. And this cut the local workforce and local families, many of which I know, have worked with.
30 seconds.
And worked with their kids. So with no inventory of housing and higher inflation and higher demand on our business, it's been a perfect storm that has created an entire sustainability crisis.
Thank you, Jed.
So,
You got it?
Yeah.
Cool. Go ahead.
So I've spoken to business leaders in our community, and I think really two problems have bubbled to the top from what I've heard. And those two problems are housing and childcare. So to take those in order, housing is a significant challenge in our community. I met a business owner a couple weeks ago who has a key staff member that can't find housing locally and commutes every single day to bake bread very early in the morning from upstate New York. That's not sustainable either for the climate or for that person's life. And so housing has to be at the center of any strategy that we pursue to improve our workforce crisis in Stowe. I plan to increase our investment in affordable housing and to modernize Act 250 to make it easier for folks to build affordable housing, especially in our downtown centers. And on childcare, too many Stowites can't access affordable childcare. I toured Apple Tree Learning Centers last week and was shocked first by the amazing work they're doing, but second by the length of the list of Stowites who are waiting to receive childcare, and that's not sustainable. I'm glad that my opponent and I both support expanding investment into affordable childcare, and I look forward to making progress on both of those issues.
Great. Yeah, Jed, you'd like a follow-up to that? Go ahead, 30 seconds.
Scott, we're fortunate we agree on this because I was in a meeting and couldn't be at Apple Tree, but I went the first day I got back, and they're doing an incredible job. Stowe's fortunate, has a lot of great child care programs. They've got a 300-person waiting list. Doesn't work too well. I wanted to talk about Lamoille Housing Partnership. They have a 500-person waiting list. So these are huge problems for our community.
Okay, how about we let me earn my salary and have you guys ask each other questions. So I think I'm lost track, already did. Jed started that one. So Scott Weathers, would you like to ask Jed Lipsky a question?
Thanks, Tommy. So, Jed, I've noticed in a lot of the information that you've shared publicly about your stances on environmental issues that you actually haven't used the phrase climate change. And just a few weeks ago, you chose to criticize tax incentives that our state provides to low and moderate income Vermonters to help them access electric vehicles. You've also said that you would vote against the Clean Heat Standard, which is the #1 recommendation of our state's Climate Council, because without it, we cannot achieve our state's climate goals. Could you tell me a concrete example of a climate bill that you would support?
I'm a little flabbergasted by some of those comments, but I think the clean heat standard is critically important. I think when the governor vetoed this clean heat standard, it was for a reason, and that is that there was no data to explain how it was going to be paid for, how the older folks and the lower middle class folks were going to pay for the retrofitting to meet this standard. We're the only state in New England that even is engaging in this type of thing with no answers or data. And my understanding is that there's a study that the legislature commissioned to the Rand Corp, I believe, that is due to present in 2024 what the cost to try to meet these Global Warming Solutions Act and all these other responsibilities. Without federal funds, they fall on the families and folks here in Stowe and all over Vermont. So to characterize me as against the clean heat standard is disingenuous and inaccurate. I just want to know what it's going to cost and how many families it's going to drive out and who's going to pay for it. And you're going to hear that. That's not conservative. That's just common sense, how anybody who's ever tried to borrow and get something done or build a business, that's how they do it. But you've got to have a plan of how it's going to be paid and who's going to pay it.
Okay, Jed, don't put that mic down. You get to ask Scott a question.
Because I get all worked up. I think Scott's a wonderful fellow, so I'm going to ask him a real, what they call a softball. And this is kind of this Vermont question. I just want to ask you, Scott, if you know what the ingredients are in switchel. And
I couldn't tell you, Jed. Why don't you tell me?
well, switchel, that was maybe too hard, but it's Dr. Jarvis. He's an old doctor from Barry and wrote a book called Folk Medicine. I know we care about health, but the primary ingredients are water, tablespoon of apple cider vinegar, and raw honey. Wicked good on a hot day in the woods. You bring a bucket with you and keeps you going all day.
Okay, Fred Tuttle, ladies and gentlemen. So, we didn't ask you about how many teats in a jersey. So, back to my questions. So, Scott, you went first with that one, asking Jed a question. So, Jed will have you answer my next question first.
Are we asking our questions in different orders, or do I ask my second question, or we go back to?
No, we're going to intersperse it. Yep.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
great.
Yeah, absolutely. I was feeling lonely over here, so give you guys a minute to think of recipes. So the town of Stowe, Scott. Who did I say is going first? Jed. Sorry. You're going first.
You said me.
Okay. Yep. Either one. There's two. I did say Jed. That's what I thought. Yeah. So there you go. I guess I get so confused with twos. So the town of Stowe just began a complete reappraisal of all the properties in town, which is expected to take about 2 years, and could and likely will see property values increase across the board. That, combined with skyrocketing home sales during the pandemic, has many people worried about being able to stay in their homes due to increasing property taxes. That's the word. Increasing property taxes. Should Vermont move the education funding formula wholly to an income-based system? Jed.
Well, that's an easy one to answer, and I could just say I don't know. I haven't looked at it, nor do I understand it. But I did 2 months ago went down to the head lister, Tim Morrissey, down in the basement of the Akeley building to discuss the impact of this reevaluation, what his reading was. And he red flagged one very critical, nuanced issue. And that is, a few years ago, the income sensitivity cap was lowered from 500,000 for the value of a home in Vermont to 400,000. Doesn't seem like that significant back when we were climbing out of the recession. But now with this COVID explosion and crazy value of houses selling for a $400,000 house might sell for $850 or $900. Now, with the cap being reduced to 400, that means an elderly family or a lower middle class family who might own that home is only going to get a income sensitivity reduction on the first 400,000. Then they're paying full freight. And you can see the Conestoga wagons and pickup trucks loaded with people having to leave home because it's going to make those folks that are struggling with meeting all their obligations over the top. And I know Tim is aware of this. I did speak to Governor Scott about this, and I assure you if I get down to Montpelier, I will share this with other colleagues because this is an impact that's going to not just be in gold towns, it's all over our state.
Sure, Scott. Stowe, the town of Stowe just began a complete reappraisal of all the properties in town, which is expected to take 2 years and could and likely will see property values increase across the board. That, combined with skyrocketing home sales during the pandemic, has many people worried about being able to stay in their homes due to increasing property taxes. Should Vermont move the education funding formula wholly to an income-based system?
Yeah, that's a great question, Tommy. I think I'll just talk a little bit about, I think Jed, correctly diagnosed the income sensitivity issue. I think for a lot of Stowites, who are of lower or more moderate income, but who are house rich, the changes the legislature has made to the income sensitivity program are going to be a rude awakening for a lot of folks. And as your state representative, I hope to directly address that problem. I think something that I can add to this conversation is really the importance of electing a Democrat. Our legislature and our two-party system, whether you like it or not, I have an issue with it, my opponent has an issue with it, but our legislature in Vermont is predominantly Democratic. And that means that if you want to get the votes to be able to pass legislation and to be able to work for your town, you have to be able to work with the primary party in power. And I'm proud to be running as a Democrat to be able to deliver for our town and to deliver the bills that I've already mentioned. That's why I'm running, and that's why I'll have the ability to make changes to the income sensitivity program. Thank you.
Okay, Scott, you're.
Tommy, excuse me, may I make a comment on that last statement?
But so I mean,
Pardon me?
what would you like to add?
Well, I just want to categorically disagree with the notion that being with the majority or supermajority party that gives you an advantage in passing legislation. I think my skills.
I think rebuttal shouldn't be, reserved for, like, if he addresses you personally or anything on your politics. So thanks.
Okay, I apologize.
In this next question, Scott starts. One of you already teed it up for me, but we'll go for it. We all love this one. Several times last year, this town saw epic traffic jams along Mountain Road, primarily caused by people heading up to the ski resort. Town officials have said that there's not much that they can do other than have police perform traffic duty or respond to emergencies because Mountain Road is a state highway. What do you think can be done at the state level to help alleviate the traffic on Mountain Road?
Yeah, it's a really important issue. Traffic comes up in just about every conversation that I've had with folks in town. My partner, Michaela, and I, as I said, live right on Mountain Road across from the Matterhorn. So, in the winter, we wake up to this traffic every day. It's a major issue for our quality of life and for Stowites across our town. I think what a state representative can do on this issue, our town has been struggling for years to build reasonable bus stops along Mountain Road, and we can't because it's a state highway, and the state won't let us do that. So as your state representative, I plan to work with the Agency of Transportation to finally let us build real bus stops so that we don't have workers that are going to the mountain to work at 6 a.m. standing there in the cold. I plan to make sure to try to increase funding so that we can have more regular public transit on Mountain Road and along other parts of our town as well. I think the traffic that we see on Main Street is something that we need to look at, and there have been a lot of ideas floated in our community about how to address that, and I plan to, as your representative, ensure that whatever solution we can agree to as a community is well funded and well supported.
Jed, did you get the question? You'd like me to repeat it? Okay. Several times last year, Stowe saw epic traffic jams along Mountain Road, primarily caused by people headed up to the ski resort. Town officials have said that there's not much they can do other than have police perform traffic duty and respond to emergencies because Mountain Road is a state highway. What do you think can be done at the state level to help alleviate the traffic on Mountain Road?
Well, I have several thoughts on what the state could do, but personally, I think to tackle the traffic issue of late, we must bring together not just state officials, but town, local businesses, community leaders, V-Trans, and Vail Resorts to find solutions to relieve the stress on our highways. Among other things, this will undoubtedly include building park and ride locations or off-site parking with expanded buses for Vail Resorts, and expanding our public transit options. And I agree with Scott that if the shuttle buses had actual parking places to pull out of the traveled lane, it would exacerbate, it would eliminate some of the problem, but it wouldn't be the whole solution. But what I do know, I have a whole history, whether it was a zoning administrative officer down by Stratton and all the environmental and legal challenges that we had there, and in all my positions, there's no board or group of people that I felt unwelcome to sit down with and talk respectfully and with dignity and concern and listen to those folks, their ideas, get multiple stakeholders. And I think this is a crisis to one of the biggest cash cows for Montpelier. And with my leadership in Montpelier, whether I'm an independent or not part of it, I promise you, I have the skills and experience to bring people together and negotiate and work on solutions.
Okay. And Scott went first with the last question, so Jed, you'll go first with this one. This is another reader-submitted question. So you both are heavily involved in the Stowe community, volunteering your time to serve on boards and with community organizations. Jed, you have listed your longevity in the community among your credentials and your campaign materials. Conversely, Scott, you've been criticized by some for being relatively newer to the community. I'd like to hear from each of you why you think the length of time somebody has lived here does or does not qualify them to run for elected office. You can go first, Jed. 2 minutes.
Well, first of all, it may be a factor that affects someone's knowledge, but what really matters if they're a resident and can care to throw their hat in the ring. So I take no umbrage with Scott running for an office. But this I do know. I've known this town all but the first 4 years of my life. I love this town. I love the people. I love Vermont. I've lived and owned land and worked in different parts of Vermont. It's one of the greatest states in the Union. And it is the people and the families and their children that they had created the environment, the landscape, the texture, the farms, the villages, the Vermont vernacular architecture. This is what is great about Vermont. And I still care immensely about these people. I'm not offended by changing in the sociology or the socioeconomic factor in our town. Our town is a wonderful community, remains so, even with all these changes. So I feel my heart is in it, my knowledge and experience is there to be a leader for our community, for all people in our community. And I think that Scott has that same privilege and responsibility as well. And if I'm not the chosen rep, I will wish him the best if he becomes chosen.
Scott, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I think I'm okay. Thank you. I really appreciate that, Jed. And, I would love to grab coffee with you after this election and discuss, regardless of who wins, how we can make sure that the next state representative in Stowe is effective. I really appreciate everything you said, but that's a very different tune from what you said this morning in Vermont Digger. You levied a personal attack against me, and when you attack me, Jed, on a personal level, it hurts. It also tears this community apart. This morning in Vermont Digger, you stated that you decided to run for this office not because there was a specific bill or a specific policy change that you'd like to see, but because you didn't like me. Stowe voters are smart enough to know nativism when they see it. It's offensive to all of the people who have moved to Stowe and want to contribute to our community. When you say this kind of thing, it's insulting to every community volunteer, every young family, every worker who powers the mountain, and everyone who is a Stowite by choice. Plain and simple, my opponent has decided to resort to hateful nativist attacks because he wants to distract you from the issues. This kind of rhetoric is much closer to something that Donald Trump would say than any self-described independent. This language is backwards looking, narrow-minded, and our community is better than this. Now, I just want to take a moment to look beyond this whole campaign and the theatrics. Jed, beneath this personal attack that you're levying, I know that there's someone who's warmer, kinder, and more compassionate.
Time.
I believe that you're better than this.
Jed, would you care to rebut on that one? 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
3 minutes for rebuttal.
Scott, I haven't heard a recording of that interview with VT Digger, but I never said I did not like you. I was a little astounded, quite frankly, having spent my whole life in New England. This is the biggest town I ever lived in. But it was slightly audacious for someone to move into a community and not run for the school board or the planning board or the conservation commission. Everyone is welcome, and the town is begging folks to volunteer. But what I thought was audacious was the notion that you could come to a town and choose to run for a Republican seat to the rep in the legislature. Maybe I'm just old-fashioned New Englander. But I never said I didn't like you. I did not like the notion. I was a little taken aback that someone could take such an important position to represent and understand the folks who make this town, who live in this town, have raised their families in this town, to think that, that's appropriate. That's your decision, but I never said I did not like you. I made clear why.
15 seconds, Scott, if you want to wrap it up, and then we can move on and you guys can get
Out of my record, serving on this town's energy committee and on boards across this county. I encourage Tommy, Greg, if you want to pull up the Vermont Digger article, Jed's quotes were pretty clear. Thank you.
Moving on, Scott, Jed answered the last question first, so you get this one. Scott, we at the Stowe Reporter this summer reported that more than a quarter of all residential units in Stowe are used primarily as short-term rentals. And then we followed up that story up last week with the story showing that the percentage is even higher on the other side of that notch in Cambridge. What effect does that market have on the community, and what will you do to address short-term rentals?
Yeah, I really appreciate it, Tommy. This is an issue that I've had personal experience with. My partner and I lost our first apartment, unfortunately, in Stowe to a landlord who decided to convert that property over to an Airbnb. And, I think when it comes to Airbnb policy, it really is all about balance. I met a woman a couple of weeks ago in Stowe who was able to leave an abusive relationship because she was able to rent out her home on Airbnb. And that's liberating for her. On the other hand, I've met people in this community who are either struggling to find housing in Stowe or have lost their housing because of Airbnb. And so I think when we design policy, I think we need to make sure that folks locally who are paying for their retirement, paying for their kids' education through Airbnb, that they're able to continue doing that. But when large multinational corporations buy up dozens of properties in town and remove them from our housing stock, that's something that I have an issue with.
Thank you, Scott. Jed, do you need the question repeated? Okay, the Stowe Reporter reported earlier this summer that more than a quarter of all residential units in Stowe are used primarily as short-term rentals. And then last week, we followed that up with a report that the percentage is even higher on the other side of the notch in Cambridge. What effect does that market, that short-term market, have on the community, and what will you do to address it?
Well, it's possible that Scott and I do not disagree on this so much. Look, we've had short-term rentals in Stowe for years, and it's part of being a tourist town, same as over in Jeff. Many long-term rentals are being converted to short-term rentals because it's easier to manage and much more profitable. That is tough to argue against. I've talked with many long-term rental landlords and heard the challenges they face day in and day out when a tenant stops paying. To increase our workforce housing stock, we need to make some long-term rentals attractive. To make it attractive, we need to reform the laws that only protect tenants and offer no protections to landlords. So that's a real crisis. I met with bankers up in Morrisville, big local developers 2 weeks ago to discuss what can we do to have more workforce and moderate income rental units. And we went through some of the various costs, the challenges for capital, for regulation, for Act 250 zoning, other things. And another critical piece, and that is the workforce, the labor force. There are so many tradesmen, from HVAC to carpenters, builders, roofers, masons, electricians, that the workforce to do this, this is the crisis. And I know there's projects underway, and more needs to be done. But I know from my history as a zoning administrative officer, serving on planning boards, select boards, all these boards, I know I can lead initiatives to make things happen, work with stakeholders like the lenders and the developers to get things done.
Thank you, Jed. And Jed, you'll do my job now. We'll go back to asking each other questions. And Jed, do you have a question for Scott Weathers?
You know, Scott, I live by civility and respect, and I remember telling you 3.5 months ago that I would never shame you or disrespect you. So I am quite offended by those accusations that you skewed against me. And I have questions, quite frankly, they're put together to sort of potentially embarrass you or have people question where your financing comes from the West Coast. But this one is a simpler one because I am a civil person and a respectful person. So what I'm going to ask you is, I'm an independent and not beholden to any party. That means I'm not predisposed to an answer, but I'm going to be taking things issue by issue and listening to the people of Stowe. Can you name 2 issues where you would disagree with your Democratic Party?
There's 2 minutes to talk about those 2 issues.
Thanks so much, Jed. Civility is critical to our politics. Our politics cannot function without it, and it's absolutely essential. Jed, I just want to tell a quick story. The first conversation that we had about this race, after he declared, I gave him a call and asked to talk about this race. And I said, if you have anything that you want to talk about in this race at all, you have my number, please give me a call. And do you remember what you said to me, Jed?
No, I don't. And I didn't have your number.
You said, I don't think I'll need that for any reason. We had a second conversation, and I approached you at a restaurant, said, hi, I'm Scott Weathers, it's great to see you. And you had absolutely no interest in talking to me. I would love to see a better observation of civility in our politics from both sides. And in terms of disagreeing with my party, I'm proud to be a Democrat. There are a variety of issues where I agree with my party, whether it's supporting climate change, or supporting the fight against climate change, or passing paid family leave. I'd like to see members of my party fully fund our police, who I think are doing a good job, and that's a key issue where I would disagree with many people in my party.
You still have time. Did you have another one? I think you're good. Okay. You don't have to put that down because you get to ask Jed a question.
Constituents in our town, Jed, have asked you where you stand on gun violence, and you've avoided answering. Last year, a woman in Elmore was shot and killed by her husband. Many of the students and teachers that I've spoken to in our community do not feel safe in our schools. Our state has the highest rate of gun deaths of any state in New England. And over 70% of Americans support some of these sensible, bipartisan gun safety reforms that could prevent these deaths. Why don't you?
That's
You're very enlightening, Scott. You get it wrong every time. It's really something. I'm a gun owner, and I support the right to bear arms. And I understand the long history of owning firearms. But I do, and I'm proud to have seen our representative, Heidi Sherman, stand with the governor back in 2018, passing a tripartisan support for gun control legislation. And I hope to continue that legacy. there were many aspects to that legislation that I'm happy to hear have been enhanced, even as recently as this last session, and I support every single one of them, from red flag laws to extending the background checks from 3 days to 7 days. How can you make these accusations with pure ignorance? There isn't one gun control safety issue that's been agreed by our governor and by our legislature that I don't support. And I will tell you this, I have grandchildren, I've got a son in the military, they're overseas. I worry for every family, every child, every churchgoer, every person who goes to any assembly from gun violence. It is a scourge in our society, and it's can be controlled partly by gun regulation. But mental health crises, starvation, hunger problems, disenfranchisement, these are very complex issues. And you're absolutely wrong to accuse me of not supporting this. I don't know where you get these notions.
You can have about 30 seconds if you want to.
Tommy, so Jed, I'm really glad to hear this. I'm shocked to hear that you now are saying that you support gun safety reforms. This is the first that I've heard of this throughout this campaign. We've been doing this for a while, and I can name several people who've reached out to you, and you never responded. So what caused this change for you?
Well, there's a big difference between you and me, and that's I work a minimum of 40 hours every week. I don't have time to go campaigning, so, and I'm not an internet wizard. And when I sense that there's somebody who's trying to poke me, I have stuff on my website that shows my position. But there's some people I've been suspect.
I think you both have mentioned civility, so if we can keep it civil, that would be great. Or I might not give you a chance to ask each other more questions and may just put you both in the timeout corner. So. This question is for, I think, sorry. Jed goes first, this one. This was mentioned briefly, but childcare is an issue, obviously. Let's Grow Kids calculated that Vermonters spend roughly 30% of their income on childcare, and at least 2/3 of Vermont families have both parents working. And at the same time, the waiting list to get into childcare facilities and early education facilities is longer than a mountain road traffic jam. What can be done to kind of alleviate the childcare situation in Vermont?
I might as well just speak from my heart rather than try to flip through all these notes and stuff. So, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, that early child care is one of the most critical challenges facing our community. Here's something that I've learned, and even years ago when I was on a school board, and raising young kids, someone would say most kids' personalities and learning is formed from birth to 5 years old. I brought this up recently in discussing this. What are you talking about, Jed? I went down, I spoke to a early child care director in Stow. Spent a great time one-on-one and asked them that same question. What they made clear is that it's the brain synapses from birth to 5 that affect your learning ability and your ability to absorb much other information from K through 12 and beyond the rest of your life. So what are things that affect that? Stress, diet, poverty, domestic challenges. That's why this is one of the most important 3 legs of my primary milking stool goals, because it is critical. Having served on school boards and know what it takes to put great programs together, if so much damage is done in those first birth to 5 years old the mountain's 10 times steeper and more challenging and more expensive for our entire society. So this is important, and I just can't express that enough. There is a shortage. It's a high cost. We as a legislature, we as a state are going to have to sit down together and figure out what kind of partnerships and where the funding is going to come from. I do not have those answers, but I promise you from my heart, this is a huge problem that must be addressed as we go into the future.
Scott, did you get the question? Or do you need me to repeat it?
I think I got it. Thanks, Tommy. So I think workforce challenges in our childcare industry are absolutely essential. The workers that we entrust with taking care of our kids are doing a phenomenal job, but they've been stressed and burned out by the pandemic, and we're not compensating them enough. And I'm glad that both of us support an additional investment in our childcare system to make sure that our workers are better paid. One area that I'd love to see, one improvement that I'd love to see in this area, and rather than assume, I'll just ask, would you support increasing the minimum wage to, say, $15 an hour? Just yes or no?
Yes, I would consider it. But
You would consider it, or? You can take the mic.
oh, you're off.
Take the mic.
So, question, Tommy, is this one of candidate Scott Weathers' questions for me?
I think you're on Scott's 2-minute dime right now.
And you asked me if I would support the $15 minimum wage. That horse left the barn years ago. You can't hire someone for $20 an hour in this town, or 25 or 30. So a 15, and that may not last forever because we've got a looming crisis coming, and with high debt, high inflation, and rising interest rates. So I think $15 an hour is not an unreasonable number, but it doesn't relate to our economy today, period. Good luck hiring someone in Stowe for $15 an hour doing anything. Child care workers, that is really important. They are underpaid, understaffed, and it's $40 an hour.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the thoughts, Jed, and I agree with all of them. I think it's pretty clear that there's one of us who supports increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I can commit to that. And it's an essential part of improving our childcare industry. We also need to pass paid family leave so that mothers in particular don't need to leave the workforce to take care of their kids. And those are two issues that I'll deliver on.
Thank you. So Scott, we are closing in. We've been at it an hour, and I just want to do a temperature check. Are there people in the audience who are going to want to ask questions? Show of hands. Okay, cool. So I'll ask one more and then turn it over to you folks. So Scott, last year, Stowe voters approved contributing $200,000 to help conserve the 217-acre Ricketson farm, protecting it from development. Now, there are a lot of housing developers out there who would love to build on a tract of land that large. How do you balance the need for development and the need for open spaces in Stowe?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm strongly supportive of the Ricketson Farm project. Really grateful to have folks at Stowe Interest here today. Thank you so much for your work. I've been really glad to partner with many of you as a volunteer, and Michaela and I go to many Stowe Interest events. I think it's a very tricky balance between preserving open space and affordable housing. When I speak to the leaders in affordable housing and conservation, I see a lot of agreement, actually. And I've been really glad to see the head of Stowe Land Trust and the head of Lamoille Housing Partnership author op-eds together to make sure that they're working in tandem. We can focus our affordable housing construction in downtown centers so that workers don't have to travel from Eden and Belvedere and beyond. That's going to make it easier for workers to reduce their carbon emissions and to save money on gasoline. So I think while initially it looks like there might be a conflict here, I've been really happy to see the leaders in this area come to agreement, and I support exactly what they stand for.
Jed, the same question to you. Did you get the question, or do you need me to repeat it? Yep. So last year, Stowe voters approved contributing $200,000 to help conserve the 217-acre Ricketson farm, protecting it from development. There are a lot of housing developers out there that would love to build on a tract of land that large. How do you balance the need for development and the need for open spaces?
Well, as some of you know, I served a full 9-year term maxed out with Stowe Land Trust. It was a very rewarding and important community endeavor for me. But one thing you may not know is while the mission statement for Stowe Land Trust didn't change, the strategic plan mission did, and that included, and I have to say without naming anyone else, my advocacy was a very, very strong voice in that initiative. It was very important to me to balance conservation. We've conserved Katy Hill, Brownsville, Hudson, Hunger Mountain Headwater watershed land, thousands of acres. Very proud of these efforts. Most of those weren't appropriate, but we as a land trust, and even though I'm off the board now, I'm still a member, still value and push when there are opportunities and not covenants that restrict the development, that this is a very important thing that we're looking at. I personally have went to a developer and went to the executive director of the Stowe Land Trust while I was still on the board and said, there's a piece of property on Maple Street with a high density capacity. I know the developer, and I think he or they, excuse my pronoun, may be willing to work with our initiative. And our executive director, at my requesting, did get together with this person, did do a very historic partnership with Lamoille Housing Partnership. It's right there, it's painted white, and it's very well done. And I'm not taking responsibility for that phenomenon, but I played a part. And I have played a part in both housing. This is my wheelhouse, folks. I get things done and believe in the balance of our environment and this incredibly crisis issue of housing.
Thank you, Jed. So we have a microphone at the front of the stage here. And I know some of you can probably shout, but since we are recording with Green Mountain Access, they'd love it if you could speak into the microphone. I'd say we have time for probably 4 or 5 questions from the audience. So if anybody would like to ask something, I saw your hand raised right there, Miss.
Hi, my name's Liz Soper. I'm a resident of Stowe, and I've heard you both talk about crisis after crisis after crisis in Stowe. But what I'm not seeing, particularly from you, Jed, is the climate crisis, which to me is the most important crisis that we are facing on this earth today, whether it's in Stowe, Vermont, or whether it is in Miami, Tampa, that has just been pulled apart. So listening to you talk about the clean heat standard, I don't think you quite understand it correctly. It's all about fossil fuel companies trying to be cleaner in the fuel that they're using. So I guess I work with Scott on the Energy Committee, so I know his stance on climate change. I know he will be passionate about this in Montpelier. I know he will vote for what our climate folks are telling him, the scientists are telling him what to do. I guess I just want to hear from you what you plan to do about the climate crisis in Montpelier. Thank you.
Take it away, Jed.
Thank you very much for that question. What am I going to do about the climate crisis in Montpelier? You mean the global climate crisis? Climate change. Well, I can assure you this, I'm no climate change denier. I live with it every day. I'm out in the environment, managing an ecosystem that spreads the entire northern forest. So, Liz is your first name, Ms. Soper?
Yes.
This is a global crisis. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, I'm not saying, I don't know Bill McKibben. I did have a dialogue with him about 8 years ago up at Spruce Peak. He's really incredible and good catch there. He's quite something. But I don't know what I'm personally going to do, but I will work to address climate change, what we as a state can do effectively. This is a big issue, and clean heat is a big issue, and I plan to, don't take me as a contrarian on this, because that is not accurate. I'm just saying we have to come up with ways to pay for these initiatives that will affect our small part of the global climate change and our state and our families. So you have no fight with me. Like I said early in this session, I want to know how we're going to pay for these efforts, and I'm not fighting efforts. We all need to solve these problems together. I want to know how we're going to be able to pay for it, particularly those that are the most vulnerable in our communities, which are some of the elderly or the lower earning folks. And we're all in this together. And I'm not an adversary, I'm an advocate, and will do more than my part, I promise you.
Thanks, Jed. I'll just add here, when you elect a state representative, and I think my opponent is here as a good man. I know that there's a lot of honor in the work that he does, but when you elect a state representative, you're electing someone who's going to vote on bills and who's going to co-sponsor legislation. I've been clear about where I stand on these issues, and I really appreciate the question from Liz. I support the clean heat standard, and I think that it's critical to the long-term future of our mountain economy that we protect ourselves from climate change. Fighting climate change is not just about the environment. It's about leaving a world that we can be proud of to our children and our grandchildren.
Show of hands, anybody? Mr. Pelletier? It's all right. We need to get up and stretch. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm John Pelletier, and I've got a question that frankly came out of your reporting, Tommy, which I thought was great. I think all Tommy's reporting is great. So, but if you want to know about candidates, I'd like to understand who's supporting the candidates. And I looked at both of your reports. You have 4 reports you have filed, and the only disclosures you have are of people who have donated more than $100. And Scott, you have 55 people who have donated more than 100, and Jed, you have 51. But the big difference between those two groups is that 33 of Scott's donations have come from people out of state, 20 from California, from Los Angeles, San Francisco, Hollywood, California, Berkeley, Oakland, other states as well. It equals 2/3 of your donations over $100. Jed, you have some as well, about 10. I'd like you to describe why people from out of state are so interested in your campaigns.
Thank you, John. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah,
First off, just if that's accurate, just let us know. I mean, I did that report a while ago, so.
No, I really appreciate the question and the concern. I agree. I think campaign finance is important, and who your supporters are can tell you a lot about what kind of candidate you have. I'm proud to say a couple things. I'm proud that this campaign has raised the most in this race. My campaign has raised the most in this race. But not only that, we have more donors in Stowe and more donors in Vermont than my opponent. And I think that the kind of donors that you have does say a lot about the kind of candidate you are. My opponent lists numerous donors who are known Republicans, including the chair of our town Republican Party. And I'd love to hear Jed's thoughts on that.
Are you finished? Are you finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, didn't answer the question, but whatever. This I know, there were some out-of-state donors. My brother is a resident in the state of Maine. He goes to the VA over there. He made a donation. He said never made a political donation in his life. I've got 5 or 6 cousins. One's in Longmeadow, Mass. One's down in Rensselaer County, and they're all over. So I'd say 90% of the out-of-state donors were my family. I'm the poorest in our family, which is actually not saying much, but I was touched by they're excited that Jed's stepping in the ring, you know, what can I say? And, you know, I will never throw anybody in our town of Stowe under a bus. If they have an R in front of their name, I'd never even met that fellow who's head of the Republican Party. But they know me, and they know that I am a caring, environmentally responsible steward in our community, and I don't care if they're Democrats, which I've got a lot of support from Democrats, thank you, and independents. So don't insult anybody who's a taxpayer or a resident in this town. I'm very appreciative of their support. They care as much about Stowe as I do, and most everyone in the room. And as far as you answering your question, someone want to know why they're all from California, or a lot of them. I have no idea. So I can't answer. Nor do I.
Did you want to follow up on that at all, Scott? The question was.
I mean, all I'll say is just, I mean, this is the same kind of nativist attacks that we've seen throughout this campaign. I think it's disappointing and frustrating. I've explained clearly, you know, where that I'm proud I'm proud of my donors and proud of where they come from, and I'd like to see a community that's welcoming to everyone.
Thank you. And also, John, stay tuned for tomorrow's edition. We have the latest numbers for you. So. Anybody else have a question? Right here in the front.
Candace Almquist, a Stowe resident. If you are successful at being elected representative and can choose which House committee to sit on, which would it be and why?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. Jed, I believe you're up to answer that. Where would you like to be if you're elected?
Candace, you know, some people like to be considered the smartest person in the room and know all the answers. I haven't but I'm not one of them, and I don't know all the committees. I'm very excited to serve our community, and I know that I have a diverse amount of expertise, actually, and experience in a number of areas. But I'll cross that bridge after November 8th, and I will head down there and talk to folks and see where I can best serve and represent our community, but I don't have that answer now, Candace.
B.
Yeah, it's a great question, Candace. Thanks so much. I've given it a little bit of thought. I've mainly focused on winning this race in front of me, but a couple of thoughts I'll share right now. A number of folks in this community have encouraged me to consider the education committee. Now, it's absolutely critical that we maintain local control of this school and of this school district. And there are a number of folks in this crowd that I just want to credit for the incredible work that they've done on behalf of that effort. I've seen Lee Pelletier here. I don't think Porter Thorndike is here, or Jim Brockhausen. There are a number of folks that have done absolutely incredible work to withdraw from the school union. And I think that serving on the education committee is one committee that I'd be excited about. I have a background in public health and environmental issues, and so there are a number of committees in both of those areas that I would consider as well. So, I don't know the answer yet, Candace. We'll find the answer when we get there, but those are some of my thoughts.
I see Tiffany's got her hand up. Tiffany, would you like to ask a question, or you?
Hi, Tiffany, close enough. Tiffany Donza, Stowe resident, mother of 4 kids being raised in Stowe. And my question is primarily for Scott, but we can hear from both the candidates. We've never really conversed, Scott, but you and I both found each other at a meeting at the Stowe Select Board in December of last year. And you were working with the Stowe Retail Cannabis Coalition. And in your words, you felt it was very important for Stowe to be a first mover in opting in to retail cannabis. And I'm just wondering if you could, one, give a little insight into your work on that coalition, and an answer as to why you feel that is so important for the Stowe community to have retail cannabis.
Thank you, Tiffany. Scott?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question, Tiffany. I'm happy to talk about retail cannabis. So legislation in Vermont right now on retail cannabis allows local cities to opt in to selling retail cannabis, which would mean they'd have a retail cannabis shop that anyone could go to with safeguards to make sure that kids under 18 aren't able to access those products, and to provide reasonable public health measures. Now, I support retail cannabis, and I think it's an important component of any, especially any tourist town. That's one key reason that I support retail cannabis as a driver of revenue. But I also think that retail cannabis is critical as our state grapples with opioid deaths. Cannabis has been shown to be an extremely helpful path for folks who are addicted to opioids to transition off of them. And our county, a lot of folks don't know this, but our Lamoille County is actually the #1 county in Vermont for opioid deaths. And so I'd like to see Stowe work on this issue. I know the select board and others are doing work to establish a pathway where we might get to retail cannabis. And many of the communities, I think actually all of the towns around us, have decided to opt into retail cannabis. We're not quite there yet, but I think we'll get there at some point.
Jed, would you like to talk about cannabis?
Well, obviously, the voters in Vermont made it legal, and now it's a question of local implementation. I'm aware of this issue, and I'm in support of the select board's more cautious approach. We need to think about the implications to our community and how it connects to Stowe's brand. Our neighbors up in Morrisville, and I know down at Waterbury Center, are building now and rolling it out, and I think we ought to watch how that works in your community. And I think it'll be up to the voters in Stowe, and I'll be following this closely and plan to listen to the community's wishes on this issue. It's important, but it's not one of the primary issues in my world. But Scott Weathers did bring up the opioid issue, and I have been over to Jenna's Promise. I know the Tatro family, and we have all had a lot of tragedy in our county. It's not just Lamoille, it's in Orleans as well, severe problems. This is a very devastating crisis and challenge, and you're in the public health field, so you know the breadth of it. So cannabis is really up to the voters of Stowe, and I support the local select board in their slightly more cautious approach.
Okay, I probably have one more question. I'll do 2. How about that? We'll do 2. You go first, and then you're already walking up, so you can walk up first, and then right behind you, and then we'll have we'll just say, yep. That.
Good evening. My name is Steve Edwards. I'm a Stowe resident, and I want to talk about the $30 parking fee that Vail has unilaterally decided to impose on people parking at the mountain on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and all holidays. It's not just the weekend. I would like each candidate to indicate whether or not they would support legislation in the Vermont House to prohibit private parties from assessing parking fees on state land without the express written consent of the state?
Thank you, Stephen. Jed, you go first on that one.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Thank you, Steve. I wrote a letter, or I guess it's not technically a letter, it's an email communique to someone named Becca Washburn. She works for the state Division of Parks, Forest Parks and Recreation. Communicating sort of my disappointment in that restriction for local folks to be able to access the mountain, and I haven't heard back. But to that point, I do understand that the way the lease reads now, we have under the current legislation that enables that lease. If I get to Montpelier, that would be an area where I would vote to restrict private parties from prohibiting or charging local folks access to those parking facilities.
And Scott, how would you?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for your advocacy on this topic. It's absolutely critical. It's come up in a lot of my conversations. People's pocketbooks are stretched thin. Inflation on pretty much every good is up, and this is just one of those effects. So I really want to thank you, first off, for the work you're doing on this and for holding all of us accountable, not just my opponent and I, but our incumbent representative and the select board. It is absolutely critical to the functioning of our democracy that we hold our elected officials accountable. So I submitted a letter to the editor. Greg, I don't know if we're publishing it this week, but I submitted a letter to the editor in response, and I think, while I can't right now commit to exactly what you suggested, I haven't studied it, and I don't know the full implications of what that would mean for our mountain community and for others across the state. Here's what I can say right now. I would like to see Vail charge, or reduce or eliminate the cost of parking passes for locals. This is a model that has been tried at numerous vacation resorts nationwide, whether it's mountain resorts, beach resorts, and many others. There's no reason that locals should have to pay for a parking pass. This is a fair way to do it, and I'm proud to say, as someone that moved here, that this is an approach that won't balance the back of our parking problem on the backs of locals. So that right now, that's what I support, and I think our traffic and parking issues are significant. It's going to take a lot of different solutions, but that's one right now that I'd be very excited about.
Thank you. And bring us on home.
Last one. I promise it's not divisive either. Hi, I'm Abby Young, and I'm a Stowe resident. I'm a mom, and I'm a wife of a teacher. And so my question is about an issue that was covered extensively over the years, is about fulfilling our commitment to teachers' retirement funds. And given that our teachers have been local and national heroes during the pandemic, we all know this, and that there has been an influx of funds to support education. I'm just wondering if, when you're in the State House, both of you, either of you, how you feel about continuing Vermont's commitment to funding teacher retirements, considering they don't make very much money and they thought they were getting a retirement when they started the job. So that's all.
Thank you, Abby. Good question. Scott, can you take the first stab at that?
Yeah, I really appreciate, Abby, the question and for asking something that's not divisive. It's, civility is absolutely critical in our democracy. And, I've supported from day one our pension obligations. It's absolutely essential that we take care of our teachers, we take care of our state government workers, and throughout this campaign, I've earned the support of every major union in Vermont. So I promise to continue to support our teachers, to continue to support our nurses, our state workers, and anyone else that may receive a pension. Thank you.
Jed.
Well, we certainly agree on this. I have to say, it's possible that I could have received every one of those endorsements as well if I had stayed on the internet and didn't work. So I really feel bad that I didn't, because I'm proud of you. I'm very proud of you, Scott, for all of your endorsements. Frankly, it's really impressive. I'm not good at that internet stuff. So anyway, but unfunded liabilities, Abby, are a big deal. And they are somewhere in the $7 to $8 billion or range, which is a giant amount for public sector employees, state employees, and educators. There's a reason why I serve on school boards, is because I think that your role in our future is the most possibly, and I said this to Tiffany, or any educator. Educators play a big factor in the success and failure of our societies and civilization. And I agree, they are not overpaid, they are underpaid for the most part. A great educator, there isn't enough money in the world to pay them. They're very important. And a promise made is a debt unpaid. And if you have a contract and a liability, they must be acknowledged and met. But that has one other factor. While we're struggling to deal with this unfunded liabilities, when we want to pile on millions and millions and hundreds of millions of additional debt, you know, it exacerbates the challenges to meet our current obligations. So I feel strongly that they must be paid, and we have to figure out how.
Scott, I saw that you wanted to say
Yeah.
something. I imagine it's about your internet acumen.
Yeah, thanks, Tommy. Well, just one thing that I'll say quickly, Jed. So in Vermont, our state government does not run deficits. The legislature actually has a strong norm against running deficits. I think that's an important fact to recognize in this debate, and I'm proud to support our unions. You know, you've made the accusation a number of times in this debate that I don't have a job. Okay, all right. Well, you know, prior to me declaring in this race, I worked across this state to put shots in arms. I worked to defend our state from the COVID pandemic, and I'm proud of that work. Right now, I'm working with folks in the service industry who are making minimum wage and somehow living on that, even with our state's incredibly high housing costs. I'm proud of the work that I do. I'm proud of the hours that I put in. Thank you.
All right. Now, I have on my agenda one more round of you folks asking each other questions, and can we do it with
I think we're out of time.
Would you like to ask another round of questions? So we'll go to closing statements then. We started with opening statement with Scott, so we'll finish with a closing statement from Jed. Jed, you got a minute to wrap things up for the closing statement. Thanks.
I believe what sets me apart are the years of experience I bring to the job, as well as my understanding of the unique needs of our town. I bring firsthand experience raising a family in Stowe, running businesses in Stowe and Lamoille County, and serving on education and planning boards and numerous other boards. I don't believe that I have all the answers, and honestly, I don't believe anyone does right now. These issues are complex. Instead, I prioritize listening to the people who are most impacted and who live these issues day to day. I will not make a policy decision without hearing from the stakeholders in our town first. I invite anyone to reach out to me with questions. My email and cell phone are on my website, jedlipsky.com, and I welcome all dialogue. I am here to serve and represent you. Thank you for this honor.
Scott Weathers, can you wrap it up for us and send us on our way?
Yeah, thanks, Tommy, and thanks to the Stowe Reporter, and thanks, Jed. Over the last few months, you've invited me into your homes, you've shared your setbacks with me, and I've learned from you. And I hope that in the course of this debate, the choice in front of you has become clear. I believe that my opponent is a good man, but I also believe that we need paid family leave, and we need to protect ourselves from the worst effects of climate change. We don't have time to wait. We need a state representative who is ready to represent this town on day one and can help provide us with the future that we deserve. My partner and I moved to Stowe to start a family, and I'm ready to do the hard work to make this town last for generations to come. Our town has been through hard times during the pandemic, but if history is any guide, I believe that we'll bounce back because of our character. More so than any mountains or any foliage, it's the people in Stowe that make our community so special. As your state representative, I'll work harder than anyone to earn and keep your trust. Thank you.
All right, and thank you, folks. Yes, give it up for both Jed Lipsky and Scott Weathers. Thank you. And, if you want to stay tuned tomorrow, we have a series of 2 debates at People's Academy where we have, it's a big night. We have the Lamoille-Washington debate and the Lamoille 2 debate tomorrow. Thanks for coming out, folks.